This episode is sponsored by SKILLSHARE. Alright, I'm excited about this video. Hopefully you'll find a lot of value in this because I'm essentially going to cram in all of my experiences in my commercial background, both from Italy and from here in LA. And that ranges from bikini shoots to sportswear to luxury clothing. And hopefully in this video I can share with you guys how I got these jobs, how I decided to shoot, edit, and light these projects, and also some things that you probably could avoid, some mistakes that I made, and also some tips and tricks that I learned along the way that I'm going to share with you in this video. So let's get into it. So right off the bat, we're going to start with how I get these projects, how to get hired for these type of shoots, because it's inevitably a question that I'm going to get asked. So we might as well cover it in the very beginning. And I also think that it's very valuable and interesting for people to know where this stuff kind of comes from. So let's start with the bad. So when I first got to LA, I was in hustle mode. I was, saying yes to literally everything without maybe doing as much research on the company as I should have. A lot of times just because the idea sounds good and everything looks nice and exciting doesn't mean that at face value that's actually what the brand is, what they're about, what kind of quality they have to the clothing. So I know that if you're starting up, that's not the answer that you're looking for. It's like, isn't there a shortcut? Can't I just get money? I know I was at that stage, and honestly, it took a while for me to, build up the clients that I have, to build up the reputation that I have. It just takes work, it just takes time, there's no shortcut. But honestly, it is so rewarding to actually put in the time, put in the practice, and kind of have the patience to build yourself up to where you can present yourself exactly as you are, as the type of style that you can bring to a project, because then the work kind of flows a lot better and you get hired and hired and hired again, versus trying to figure it out and then making a lot of mistakes, burning a lot of the bridges, not getting hired again. So let's talk about Ayra Swim. This is a swimwear company that hit me up. Hey, come work with us. Great. I was kind of freaking out because I'm like, this is a legit brand. They're doing great stuff. And there's always that sense of insecurity as creatives of like, am I fit for the job? Do I have enough? I'm very confident in my skill set and what I can do. I know what I can do. So it wasn't a question of that. It was more of, this is a new side of filmmaking that I've never seen before. So I really can't judge what I'm able to do, and I can't really have any confidence because this is something completely new. I've done fashion stuff in the past. I've done that sportswear thing and others, as well as some luxury spots in Milan when I was working in Italy. And that was all great, but it wasn't bikinis. It wasn't models in sunlight. These are all very different scenarios that can be very challenging if this is your first time getting into this. So what I'll say here now is I think that there's real benefits from getting uncomfortable, from putting yourself in shooting scenarios, in genres, in types of projects that you're not used to, because filmmaking is a language, and the more that you can practice it in all these different pockets, the more that you can enrich your overall tool set, your skills. So I think that the more that you get uncomfortable with things that you don't know, pushing that boundary, I think that's when you learn the most. So that I find valuable, not just for fashion shoots. I'm literally talking about any type of filmmaking. So even if you're not a fashion, bikini filmmaker, shooter guy or girl, this could still be interesting. These things you could still get into, even if it's not your main thing. It's always cool to explore these sides. So the first shoot was pretty intense, just because I had to work with the owner of the company, which also photographs most of the models that you see on her page. So I kind of had to inner work with her. So whenever she was using a model and taking pictures, and maybe she wanted to take a break with her and shoot another model, I had to jump in with that model and do my own thing. So we kind of had to work in each other's spaces with the same models in the same environment, which made it challenging because sometimes, you know, maybe I would dip in as she's trying to get a photo, sometimes she would dip in. So we had to kind of navigate and kind of communicate with each other at all times what we were doing and sort of the direction that we were taking. You know, if we were gonna move, we had to make sure that we were both done with the set of stuff that we needed to do with the models. So that was definitely interesting. It was a new dynamic, but it honestly kept it fresh. It kept me on my feet, you know. I almost had like a running clock, and I was like, I need to get creative. I need to get in there and get really good looking shots on a limited time. So it kind of made it more exciting. Like, it gets your adrenaline going instead of just like, we're at the beach, we're gonna take our time, we're gonna get our shots. This was more like go, 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 which was really cool for me. So let's talk a little bit about the shooting aspects of this project. This was very unique for me, especially in terms of lighting. Whenever you have a product that you have to capture, the challenges kind of rise through the roof because, you know, it's kind of like color grading and skin tones. There's a certain natural look and a real look that skin tones have to have. You can't make people orange or blue, so you have to be very careful with that. That is the same thing almost when it comes to shooting, which is also something you have to be careful of. But when it comes to shooting, the equivalent of that is the way that you capture angles, colors, lights, the way that you actually shape the light onto the model and onto the product. That becomes a whole new thing. So that's why I really want to share these things in this video, because these are not things that I learned. This wasn't stuff that someone told me before the shoot. It's like, hey, mind this, be mindful of that. I just kind of had to figure this out, and some shots didn't work, some shots worked, and I was starting to learn like, okay, this is how you shape this type of story, this type of visual. So let's start with the top don'ts. So having wide lenses with people's faces can sometimes it can look a little weird. This is not only uncomfortable, but also my face is being warped. And the more wide that we go, the more that you can see how exaggerated that is. So essentially, my ears, all my features are just getting extended. You can kind of even see the difference between 15mm and 30mm. You can see how my features are kind of getting compressed in versus when I zoom out. So in this case, it's very subtle, of course. Just going from 15 to 30 isn't gonna really do much, but you really start seeing the difference once you start using wider lenses with subjects, and then when you switch to something like maybe a 50mm or an 85mm, which are sort of the go-to lenses for portraits. So lens choices, that is huge. I don't wanna get too much into this video because that is a whole beast of its own, but just know that you are probably going to deform things when you're using a wide angle lens. So be mindful when you're getting really close to subjects. I have in some of the shoots, I mean, I was getting pretty close. I was getting really dramatic movements and all that with this lens, but I was still being very mindful about, you know, not getting too physically close to the model. And also, here's another big pointer for fashion shoots, for whenever you have a subject, especially a model, don't tilt up and down. If you're trying to establish an outfit or anything of that nature, you don't want to kind of like go with a wide lens, get close, and sort of tilt up. Because what's going to happen is, again, with that distortion, you are distorting the lines of the fabric, you're distorting the figure of the body. So the more that you do that sort of up and down movement, the more that sort of wide sphere of that lens is interacting with your subject, the more it is kind of deforming it and warping it. So you don't want that. What you should do is actually kind of crane up in a way. So physically move up instead of just being kind of stationary and doing this, really kind of dip out of frame and come back up. No, just physically go up and down, because then you are kind of staying leveled with what you're shooting and you're not having as much of that warp. You're still gonna have distortion if you're in close proximity, but when you are doing those sort of movements, even panning side to side, and your subject maybe might get to the edge of frame, which could be really nice composition-wise, sometimes maybe you don't want that, because when it's a little bit too to the edge of frame, then things kind of start to get stretched, because again, that's what some wide lenses do. So you can sort of start to see that shooting these is very different from anything else. I mean, sometimes you might even go against what the story might want because priority is the product. And this is a side of commercial shoots and fashion shoots that I always clash with. I'm always trying to find that balance of what I personally find cinematic as a filmmaker, what I find that can serve the story and the vibe that I'm trying to establish, while still serving the product first and making it look as what it looks like in real life, but not only that, to also kind of really make it stand out and also to abide by all of the rules that product shoots have. Not only that, sometimes you have to listen to a creative director or to someone above you that is essentially going to look at this piece and has to approve it for the brand, for the product. And sometimes they're just like, no, this is not good, you have to reshoot it. Even though you think it's the most cinematic and epic looking shot, it might not go over so well when it comes to actually showcasing the product, which is what who hired you is actually looking for. So I know it seems like we're talking about details, you know, like the distortion of a wide lens and all of these like kind of minor intricacies of getting a visual for a product, but this is the foundation of it all. If you already have a sort of an idea and this type of exposure to what's about to come, then you can kind of handle these stages a lot better. So let's go back to the beach shoot. How do we even place a model in the sun? So here are some really quick and dirty ways to light a model on the beach, to light anyone really with natural sunlight. What I recommend doing is either placing the sun to where you would place your key, so you can maybe get a really nice source that you can then diffuse somehow. And since you can't rotate the sun as a light, you literally rotate the subject until you find an angle that works and where the light is behaving with the environment and the subject in the way that you want. And then from there, you can then maybe add a little bit of fill with a bounce board, which is what I had to do to really make the figure stand out, to really add shape to our subject and to the bathing suit, so that it almost seems as there's two sources that can really highlight the edges and the lines of the swimwear. So these are all things that are really important, getting comfortable with the sun, knowing the position of where the sun is going to be oftentimes before you get to location. That would be the ideal. I didn't do that, but there's apps for that. There's a bunch of tools where you can really figure out where the sun's going to be, how much sunlight you have, and also like the quality of light that you'll have at golden hour, blue hour, and all these things, and choosing what time frame throughout the day will match your look best. I would avoid shooting at around times like noon or 1 or around when the sun is literally directly in front of you, because it's just going to create some really nasty eyeshadows. You can't diffuse something from the top. It becomes very complicated. You can't bounce it as much. So golden hour is of course really nice, but it is an extreme look. So if you're not going for a golden hour look, then maybe getting closer to that golden hour, but not quite a golden hour. So we're talking about like 3, 4, so that you can get the sun a little bit lower, and then you can kind of reflect back some light from it with a bounce, which could be anything. It could be any material that's white. It could be those cheap reflectors that you can find on Amazon that have double sides, and you can use them, whether they have a gold reflector or a silvery reflector. I recommend this one because it's not a lot of money, and you get two very different options as far as bouncing back the light. You can choose to go for a more warm and golden look, or you can really contrast that sun with a more silvery tone, which can be nice in some situations. So those were some of the things that I had to keep in mind when it came to shooting. Also, we had no plan for this shoot. It was more of like a test and see what kind of material we could get from this day. So I went into it just being flexible, just capturing whatever I had in mind and creating really small sequences in my head. So it wasn't about following a certain structure. It was about, okay, we're by this side of the cliff. What kind of step A, B, and C can we do as far as blocking the subject? And then from that, what kind of emotion comes out? How can we really deliver that to camera? And that's what I loved about this shoot. It was very much kind of go to location and figure it out, which is kind of nice. You get to play and you get to have just enough pressure to get your adrenaline going to really get creative in the moment. And what helped me a ton, I'll be honest, are the models. Ayra Swim, Genesis, the super amazing creative talent behind Ayra Swim, uses honestly the best of the best when it comes to models. These women are like insanely good at their job. And I know that people can think, oh, modeling, you just sit there and look pretty. That's not what modeling is at all. It's actually pretty challenging to deliver a certain emotion, to deliver a certain set of confidence to camera and selling a product. That's not a skill that anyone has, and you can really tell the difference between someone that models professionally and someone that doesn't. These girls, I mean, I could walk through setups and say, okay, this is kind of the idea, this is the emotion, this is where we're walking, and they're on it. And they deliver looks that I wasn't even asking for. Like, they get the emotion, and then they can kind of just add that extra layer on top of that of their own, because of the whole tool set that they bring to the table and their experience and their poses and their facial expressions. These are all things that these models had down. So I could really play with them. I could experiment. I could say, okay, let's change this. Let's try this. My main point with this is work with good talent if you can. A lot of times you'll think like, oh, I'm gonna save up money to rent anamorphic lenses and shoot it anamorphic. When really, maybe sometimes you need to just hire good talent, put them in front of camera, and that will shine much better than any kind of body, camera body, any kind of lens or any of that nature. So I really recommend investing in people. Of course, that comes with collaborators in your crew, having good people there, but also in front of camera, real talent, and it makes it so much easier for you to capture what's there because you have a collaborator on the other side of the lens that is working back with you. So I loved working with them. Julie and Raquel were the two models from the first day, the beach shoot, which they were just such a joy and honestly such good human beings. And of course, I could say the same about Genesis. And I'm not just kind of throwing out compliments for no reason. You don't know these people, but I think that it's a really important thing to find the right people. Once you shoot with someone and you start vibing with them, you kind of get like, okay, we can go somewhere with this. We can actually discuss ideas and we can build this together because we understand each other. I feel like I really understand Genesis. I really understand the people that she works with emotionally, and as far as like being sensitive to certain things, to certain qualities, to certain, all that stuff matters when you're working with people. Finding genuinely good connections and genuinely wanting to support that person, that is way more than a higher pay or anything like that. What I'll say with that is just to trust your gut feeling a lot more, and if you're not vibing with someone, don't work with them. All right, so now I want to show you a few things in the edit that will help you a bit. I mentioned color grading in the beginning. That was probably the most challenging part of this shoot. So let's take a look at that and let's explore ways to spice some things up, to really make things flow even better once you're done shooting, and different color grading tricks that can really give you a nice look that really delivers on the product that you're trying to promote. All right, let's take a look at. I feel like my hair is getting crazier. Let me put a hat on. Better? Better. All right, let's take a look at the editing of these short sequences. Now, when it comes to editing these, it's actually quite challenging because you have usually a ton of material. I mean, that was a whole day of shooting, and you have to really condense it into these little chunks and these little spots essentially. And if you're working for like commercials on TV, that length can change. There's all kinds of different standards that you have to abide to. But what we're mainly looking at, and what I was looking at for this project, was Instagram stuff, IGTV, YouTube, that sort of thing. So for the most part, the ads had to be 15 seconds, 30 seconds, and some of them could be even a minute if they were a post. So that's the number one thing that you need to actually keep in mind, is what is your delivery platform? Where are you posting this work? Because that's not only going to affect your resolution, your codec, your bit rate at which you export, but it's also going to affect the duration, the amount of time that these spots have to be. And sometimes that can be very challenging because you have to deliver and communicate and sell something in 15 seconds, 30 seconds, whatever the case may be. This wasn't the first time that it happened to me, so I kind of was able to develop a way to very succinctly kind of communicate ideas and kind of compress things to their minimum essential and still kind of have a nice impactful spot that can only last, like I said, 15 seconds, 30 seconds. So I'm going to show you a little bit of some ideas when you're cutting that are a little bit different for these applications rather than more long form content. So personally, I'm a filmmaker that likes to kind of linger on things. I love drive. I love the momentum, the unapologetic slow pace that it has. I think certain moments just definitely need to have that sort of breathing room. That's not the case for these, of course, because we have to get to the point, we have to sell, we have to communicate, we have to excite, we have to hype, and that all has to happen very quickly. So that the nature of your cuts, the nature of how your decisions are when you are in your timeline and Premiere, whatever you're using, are very different. All right, so let's take a look at an actual timeline of a finished product. So as you can see here, we got our time limit of 30 seconds, and I think this was like a little test edit I did, which will be good for us to see what's going on. You can see that it's all very simple, actually. So, okay, one of the things that I do with music tracks is I find the best parts that can sync up with what's happening on screen. So sometimes that is a little bit far into the track. As you can see here, this is not where the track begins. And yeah, so to kind of ease into a track instead of it starting in the middle of it and it could be a little bit abrupt, we have a fade, which is not just a fade up. This I usually kind of keyframe the volume to kind of go with some instruments or some cues in the music so that it is a little bit more natural. And then that is complemented by like I guess this is like a whoosh sound or some sort of impact that allows us to kind of fade up visually. And this kind of helps the song to not start in an abrupt way, but it's a little bit of a smoother beginning. And we have kind of a similar idea here in the end. As you can see, the song doesn't really end here. If I expand this, the song actually keeps going for quite a while. So let me Command Z that. I trimmed it up. I start to kind of like fade it out a little bit. And then there's a few supporting sound elements that really support a cut to black and a strong ending. So that is something that I recommend you guys look into when it comes to, counting the beats of your songs, knowing when to cut, when to fade things up. And then once you have a solid feeling with your track that matches your, the vibe of your shots, then you can add these sound effects and some sound design that can really smooth these things out. And something really cool to do with music when you're kind of in a time crunch as far as the running time of your piece is to really play with the cues of the songs. So visually you can see here that we're kind of in this more subdued and kind of low treble part of the music. So there's some fades, everything is kind of flowing together. And then once the drop hits, we actually match that up with the hit of this splash over here, which by the way, with a 70-200mm lens, it was really great to actually compress the background, the model, and the splash to almost make it seem like they're in the same sort of plane when really she was completely dry. Like she didn't get hit by this. This was actually closer to camera, but because everything is so compressed with a telephoto lens, this feels really impactful and visually looks pretty nice. So I kind of added some fake splashes on the lens. This is just a simple overlay that I added, and I believe I set this to screen. So that usually gets rid of the black background, and you can add really nice overlays. Something that I always do is actually use elements from my vintage light effects pack, because I can add these sort of light hits in the foreground and these sort of like weird lens behaviors that just make your footage feel a lot more detailed. That adds a lot more color contrast. So I love doing that. And by the way, guys, if you want to support the channel, you do want to check out the pack that I just mentioned, Vintage Light Effects. I just released it, and I really would appreciate it if you are genuinely interested in the product to buy it, because it really helps support the channel. So as you can see here, we have a lot of nested sequences. That is usually when you have a different aspect ratio or a different amount of pixels essentially in your screen, and warp stabilizer doesn't really like that. So whenever I have to do any kind of warp stabilization, or if I have to do some time remapping and I want to stabilize the footage, I will kind of make a nested sequence, and then I will make my adjustments on that nested sequence layer. So in case you're having issues with warp stabilizer or time remapping applied to the actual clip, you want to make sure that you are right clicking on it, and then you can say nest, and you can make a nested sequence that way. And I'll add one note on the shooting aspect. In anime, a lot of times when the animators are trying to communicate motion very quickly, let's say that someone is throwing something or throwing a ball, usually they'll kind of not put in a lot of detail in the environment, and they'll kind of just more or less suggest what is happening instead of just detailing out everything in the frame. And that helps our brain to understand a lot more quickly what is thrown at us. So if you had a more detailed image, for example, your brain has to process a lot more information in that moment, so what you're trying to communicate in that one shot could be lost. So that's why sometimes simplifying things in your shot when you're filming, knowing that it's going to be a quick cut, can be really, really powerful. How do you do this in film? Of course, you can't remove detail in the real world, but you can position and move things accordingly. And also, you can use close-ups. Close-ups are a great way to capture detail and to occlude essentially the part of the world that could be distracting or confusing to the audience in that one quick shot. So that's my tip in editing, but of course that has to come from shooting. Whenever you're planning on doing quick cuts and you're moving from shot to shot, there's two things that you have to keep in mind. One is the amount of detail, like I said, so maybe a close-up is better, and that way you can maybe have, if it's a headphone or something, it's just a close-up of that. It's very quick, people understand what it is, and you move on to the next thing. Now another thing, and this is something that Mad Max, the latest Mad Max movie, Fury Road has done very effectively is guiding your eye line. So if something's happening on this side of the screen and it's just in a montage of quick cuts, and then it goes from something happening here to something happening here to something happening here, your eyes are just kind of like doing this, and it becomes kind of a very spastic edit. It just doesn't flow right, and it's because in every shot you're actually tasking the brain of the viewer to jump and search for what the point of interest is in each shot. And when that happens in a rapid succession, it can get very overwhelming for the viewer. It's just kind of not good. So what to do to avoid this? Well, what you want to do is you want to set up kind of like a frame of action, or where things are going to be happening in your composition, in your shot, in your scene. So that can be just as easy as, again, what Mad Max did, is placing the contacts and points of action and, you know, faces and all that stuff that you want to pay attention to right in the center. Now, you don't have to use the center, but these are really powerful techniques to be mindful of where you're placing your points of interest, so essentially where you want the viewer to focus on, and maintain those for a sequence, for example, that could be very rapid. So if everything is on the left side of the screen, or blocking of your character is going from screen left to right, you want to keep that consistent, of course, unless you have a really specific story reason why not to do that. But usually you want to keep that flow, and you want to keep the audience engaged, and kind of keep their eyes in a sort of trajectory from shot to shot, and not have them reset every time there's a new shot introduced. That can be very jarring, and it can be, again, very, very confusing if all these shots are happening very quickly. So those are some minor things just before we jump into the edit, because I think that is also very important. You can't just do quick cuts and then think that it's a quick edit. You'll just lose people. So stuff like time remapping, or adding keyframes to kind of scale things in and out, or maybe push in or pan into certain parts of your shot that you want to more or less focus on. This is another, by the way, very easy way to maintain sort of that flow or that eye line of your viewer within your shots. If you add keyframes, you can actually very subtly guide your audience's eyes to where you want to see them from shot to shot. As long as you're keyframing, you know, if it's something in the center, of course you could just scale up, but if it's something maybe in the corner or the left or right side of frame, then you can scale and position you know, your fake post camera movement to go in whichever direction you want, and that can be a nice way to guide your audience to be like, hey, pay attention to this part, and that can be very easily done with keyframes. Now, time remapping is very powerful in very short segments like this, because it's just a very quick and easy way to add momentum, to slow things down, and to kind of like go back into the action and kind of play with that momentum. So those are the two things that I think I did the most in these commercial shoots. So whenever I need to add a little impact, whenever I need to add a little flair, and it makes sense, I try to sneak these things in, and it's just an added polish that can really glue and amalgamate everything together in my edit. Probably one of my favorite promo segments of this shoot, and it's my favorite because it has, I think, a lot more ethos than all of the other shoots. Just because, I don't know, I think we found a really nice sweet spot emotionally with the model. She managed, again, this is what I mean with working with good models. She managed to really be sensual and really like show off the bathing suit and her body, of course, which is wearing the bathing suit. But again, this is what I mean with models. I mean, the intensity and the emotional quality of her face, and also maybe the look that even she gave at the end. These are all signs of a talented person that knows exactly how to behave and how to move in front of cameras. So great as far as that. There wasn't much direction that I had to give other than that initial feeling that we were trying to go for. And then the adjustments that I made were essentially just kind of running through that scene a few times and seeing how she behaves in it, and then making minor adjustments, and then making it consistent from shot to shot, so that I could go from this close up to cutting to maybe a more wider shot and pulling out a little bit. Now, one particular thing that I wanna highlight in this part is I paid more attention to sound than any of the other segments because again, we're trying to go for the specific feels of the details of what it means to be in the beach in the summer, feeling the rocks, feeling the sand. So all of that is highlighted, of course, with close-ups, with a shallow depth of field to really pay attention to her interaction of the fingers with the rock, but also that is highlighted with the sounds. So we have all these kind of rubble and these like pebbles and sand sounds and wind sounds and all this stuff mixed together. Of course, you can see the volumes kind of dropping in and out. And this is a great way, by the way, to glue your timeline even further. We talked about time remapping and keyframes and all that good stuff, but with sound, you can see how maybe this is, I don't know exactly what this is. Let's find out. Let me solo this real quick. So, okay, so this is sort of the wind, and this is more of the tactile feel of the rocks. You can see how this kind of swells up in the moment that she makes contact, and as she moves away, it kind of dips down. So, again, it's all very subjective to her, and this is something very important when it comes to sounds. You want to make sure that you are actually kind of knowing who is listening to the sounds. Is it the camera point of view that we're, through which we're listening to sounds from, or is it the subject and what they're feeling? I went for the subject, so all these sounds are represented not by the proximity of these things to the camera, but rather how she is interacting with them and how she is feeling with her environment. Okay, so there's a few other things, but one of the main things that I want to focus on before I leave you guys is the color grading. Because honestly, it's not as easy as throwing in a LUT, making some adjustments, and that's it. For this particular project, Genesis was very specific with what she wanted, of course, as she should, and she had a very specific vibe in mind that also applied to the colors. And this was something that I wasn't really thinking about in the beginning. I just was coloring it to give it, a certain color palette that I had in mind to make it look nice and everything. But she had a completely different color palette, and she told me, she was very clear about communicating that. She was like, hey, this needs to feel like summer. This needs to feel like an exotic beach, a summer vacation. The water needs to be, crystal blue, and just there's certain colors that are associated with summer. And my initial colors, the water was more of that teal look to kind of complement the warm colors a little bit better. But what ends up happening is that if you go more in the teal side and not so much the blue, there's a very fine balance to where the water now starts to look murky, and that's not inviting. So if you're advertising swimwear, and bathing suits, maybe don't do that with the water. And these weren't things that I was actually thinking about. To me, visually it looked great. I was really happy with it. And then it took someone like Genesis that had a very clear idea on how to sell these things to tell me like, oh, this won't work. The colors actually need to be this way. So that was probably the most time-consuming aspect of this entire project. It was way more time than me shooting it. I mean, I spent days and days essentially relearning how to color grade certain parts of my process because I realized that it just wasn't working. And one of the big factors was that I shot an S-Log. Now, I'm a huge advocate for shooting an S-Log. I think it can give you that extra little bit of fake range that you can play with a lot more in post, and it's much easier to apply LUTs and I think achieving a certain look. But for these type of applications, when you're trying to keep a more natural feel, when you're trying to not mess up the skin tones too much, or things like the watercolor, I think shooting in Rec 709, that color space, or whichever color space your camera has that is just the natural look, might be better in some situations, because then it's less work for you to figure out later. Because I ended up in the end having to pretty much convert my clips to Rec 709, and because it's just really tricky to go from something desaturated and flat and try to get not only the skin tones right, but also try to get the water right. So if you're at least starting with what was there, and then you can kind of push those colors a little bit more and enhance them, that's probably a lot easier. I'm not saying that you can't do that with S-Log, but it's just a lot more challenging and a lot more time consuming for what I found personally. And it was really great, again, going back to one of my first points in this video, to collaborate with someone that is that open-minded, such as Genesis, to be like, oh, this doesn't work, but telling you why it doesn't work and building that up together. I think that was really cool of her, and it's just great whenever you can find that type of collaboration, because most people are just like, they don't know what they want, a lot of clients, and they'll just have you do 100 revisions until maybe just by luck in one of them it's like remotely close to what they were thinking. Instead, with Genesis, she was like very specific and clear, and I love that. So the more that you can have that, the better. If you don't have a client that you know, isn't working with you in that way, you really need to step it up yourself and kind of give them, you know, adjustments, give them ideas, and have them make a list of exactly what they want. Have them write it down, because a lot of times it's really hard to get into the client's head. So again, communication is super key. Also guys, I want to mention today's sponsor because, again, I think you'll find this very useful. We've talked about SKILLSHARE in the past, but I want to bring it up again for this video, of course, because they're sponsoring me, but also because I think that there's a lot of valuable stuff that you can expand upon of just even what we're talking about today on this topic over on SKILLSHARE. I love learning platforms, especially ones that are super accessible and pretty cost effective, such as SKILLSHARE. Their premium membership starts at just under $10, so that's pretty incredible for the amount of content that you get access to. So I really recommend you check them out, because there's a lot of courses on lighting, on shooting, on cinematography, stuff that is super interesting. And honestly, I just love spending my time there, just going course after course and just getting as much knowledge and skills as possible, so that when we're talking about getting uncomfortable on shoots and new aspects of filmmaking, at least you can have a basic idea of what you're getting into and have some sort of techniques already down. So I really recommend SKILLSHARE. They have thousands and thousands of classes. I guarantee you probably can't get to the end of all of them. There's just so much knowledge on there. I really recommend it. So if you're interested in a premium membership, go ahead and use the link in the description, and hurry up, because the first 2 months are actually going to be completely free for the first 500 people that sign up with my link in the description. So go check out SKILLSHARE, sign up for their premium membership, and start diving into their knowledge goodness.
Ah, the hair light wasn't on. This whole time? I spent so much time setting that up and it wasn't on. By the way, guys, what do you think of this streak over here? New addition to the lighting. Do you want to see what I got? Let me show you what I got. Since we're talking about lighting and filmmaking, check it out. Boom, we got a 300D that is giving me my key. We were supposed to have the ice light too rigged up top that can give me a nice hair light. Then we have another 300D with the Fresnel mount that is giving that nice beam in the background. And then that bluish subtle kicker is from this Tri-8 with my favorite gel of all times. All right guys, I hope this is in focus. I hope you learned something from this video. If you want me to share anything else that I might have not covered in this particular video, something else that you might have noticed in some of the projects that I shared in this video, some of the commercial shoots that I did, feel free to DM me on Instagram. That's the fastest way to get to me. Or comment down below any questions or any follow-ups that you would like me to make in a future video about this. I hope this angle isn't awkward, and I will see you next time.
Dizzy from the way this world is turning, turning. Different from the way our mothers told us. Can't seem to figure out which way is up or down. Can you point me in the right direction now? We're all just trying to find our place, but each day could go a million ways. I guess we're all running the same race.